The first light of dawn revealed a world that seemed frozen in despair. Smoke still rose from shattered buildings, streets lay littered with debris, and the skeletal remains of what had once been homes and businesses loomed like silent witnesses to the horrors that had unfolded. In cities across Europe and Asia, from Warsaw to Dresden, from Tokyo to London, the war had left nothing untouched. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, landmarks vanished into ash, and the fabric of everyday life had been violently torn apart. For the millions returning from battlefields or emerging from hidden shelters, the landscape was almost unrecognizable, a grim reminder that life as they had known it had been irreversibly altered. And yet, amid this destruction, the question that demanded an answer was not only how to survive, but how to rebuild from near total annihilation. Urban planners, architects, engineers, and government officials confronted challenges unprecedented in human history. The destruction was not limited to homes and roads, it had shattered the very systems that allowed cities to function. Water networks fractured, power grids collapsed, transport routes destroyed, and essential services paralyzed. Narrow streets that had once defined the charm of European towns had become death traps under the bombs. Overcrowded housing, poorly planned industrial areas, and outdated infrastructure had amplified human suffering during the conflict. Reconstruction could not merely restore what was lost, it had to rethink the principles of urban life, creating cities resilient to future disasters, efficient for modern populations, and reflective of cultural memory. The task was immense, requiring innovation, vision, and coordination on a scale never attempted before. In Warsaw, the obliteration of the old town became both a tragedy and a challenge for planners. Every brick, every facade had to be reconstructed with meticulous care. Painters' sketches, photographs, and surviving documents became guides as architects worked to recreate the historical city with astonishing accuracy, ensuring that cultural identity endured despite the physical destruction. Surrounding neighborhoods, however, were redesigned to incorporate modernist principles. Wide avenues replaced narrow lanes, standardized housing blocks offered practical shelter for displaced populations, and zoning laws separated residential areas from industrial and commercial districts. Le Corbusier's influence and the modernist emphasis on light, ventilation, and communal spaces reflected a new philosophy. Reconstruction was not only about shelter, but about shaping the quality of life for the future. In Germany, cities like Dresden and Cologne adopted approaches that balanced speed and preservation. Prefabricated buildings allowed neighborhoods to rise quickly, addressing the urgent need for housing. Historic churches, municipal halls, and monuments were partially restored, blending memory with contemporary architectural techniques. Roads were widened, bridges rebuilt with greater capacity, and entire transportation systems overhauled to accommodate the growing movement of people and goods. Planners learned from wartime failures. Cities had to function efficiently under both ordinary and extraordinary circumstances. Reconstruction was not merely reactive, it was proactive, seeking to prevent future vulnerabilities while honoring the past. Utilities and essential services posed another urgent problem. Water mains had fractured, electrical networks were down, and sewage systems were dangerously compromised. In London, which had endured the relentless Blitz, hospitals and sanitation facilities were rebuilt with an eye toward durability, integrating technology that could withstand emergencies. Urban reconstruction became an exercise in social engineering, aiming to restore not just infrastructure but the rhythms of daily life. A city's survival was now measured not only by the number of buildings standing, but by how effectively it could support human activity. Transport systems, destroyed during the war, required extraordinary ingenuity. Bridges had been demolished, roads turned into rubble, and rail networks severed, isolating communities and cutting off critical supply lines. Planners embraced modern concepts, streets were straightened and widened, grid systems replaced medieval layouts, and bypasses ensured mobility even if a primary route was blocked. Railways were rebuilt to be faster and more resilient, connecting cities efficiently while integrating stations into urban life. Public transit trams, buses, and subways was restored and expanded, facilitating the flow of workers, students, and civilians. Cities were not only reconstructed physically, but restructured to allow movement, commerce, and social interaction to resume with minimal friction. The human dimension of reconstruction was equally vital. Millions of refugees, returning soldiers, and displaced families needed shelter, food, employment, and education. Housing projects were planned to integrate schools, clinics, markets, and communal spaces, fostering social cohesion alongside physical recovery. Parks, playgrounds, and plazas offered not just recreation, but psychological relief, reminding citizens that life, despite its disruption, could continue. Social infrastructure became inseparable from physical reconstruction, with urban design playing a crucial role in restoring dignity, normalcy, and hope. Cultural identity was carefully preserved amid modern construction. Rebuilt palaces, churches, and public squares in Warsaw, Dresden, and Tokyo served as monuments to resilience, while memorial parks in Hiroshima honored both memory and the possibility of renewal. Planners understood that cities were more than concrete and steel, they were vessels of human history, memory, and identity. Reconstruction became a moral endeavor as much as a practical one, balancing remembrance with the pragmatic need to shelter and sustain life. Ultimately, the reconstruction of post-war cities was a monumental, multi-layered project. It demanded vision, innovation, and collaboration across disciplines and nations. Architects blended tradition with modernity, engineers rebuilt functional networks, and citizens adapted to new ways of living. The ruins of Warsaw, Dresden, Tokyo, and London were not obstacles, they were opportunities to reimagine urban life. Each rebuilt street, every restored bridge, and all reopened public spaces became symbols of ingenuity, resilience, and hope, proving that society could rise from devastation not merely as survivors, but as architects of a better, more sustainable future. In these reconstructed cities, life slowly returned. Streets buzzed with commerce, public transport carried citizens across neighborhoods, and schools and markets resumed operation. Utilities functioned reliably, neighborhoods formed new communities, and cultural landmarks became touchstones of shared memory. Reconstruction was not just about replacing what had been destroyed, it was about creating cities that were smarter, safer, and more resilient. The lessons of wartime destruction informed every decision, from building materials to street layouts, from public spaces to transportation networks. The goal was to build cities capable of withstanding both time and the unforeseen challenges of the future. As the sun set over the newly rebuilt skylines, the evidence of human perseverance was undeniable. Cities that had once been reduced to rubble now stood as testaments to collective effort, planning, and creativity. The scars of war remained, but they were intertwined with signs of rebirth. Brick by brick, street by street, life was reclaiming its place. In the aftermath of unprecedented devastation, humanity had begun a journey not only of recovery, but of transformation. Post-war reconstruction was the story of turning destruction into opportunity, chaos into order, and despair into hope. And in every street, every building, and every public square, the message was clear: the future could be built stronger, smarter, and more resilient than the past. Rebuilding the arteries, transport and urban mobility. The aftermath of war left cities paralyzed in ways few had anticipated. Streets that once hummed with the rhythm of daily life were now fractured, bridges were toppled, and rail lines lay twisted and unusable. For millions, movement was no longer a simple act, it was a challenge fraught with obstacles, delays, and dangers. Reconnecting urban centers and rural outposts became a top priority for governments and planners. Without functioning transport networks, relief supplies could not reach those in need, factories could not resume production, and the fragile process of economic recovery was stalled before it even began. In this environment, rebuilding mobility became as critical as reconstructing housing or utilities. It was the lifeline through which cities would regain their pulse. In Rotterdam, where the port and canals had been devastated by bombing raids, engineers faced the dual task of restoring both commerce and connectivity. Roads were widened to accommodate heavy vehicles transporting goods from the rebuilt docks, while canals were dredged, reinforced, and integrated with modern transport facilities. Bridges, once narrow and fragile, were rebuilt to carry heavier loads and withstand potential future destruction. Every decision reflected a forward-looking philosophy: mobility systems would not merely replace what had been lost, but anticipate the demands of a rapidly modernizing society. Rotterdam became a model for integrating transport networks with urban planning, showing that recovery could simultaneously serve commerce, residents, and future growth. Railways, which had been a primary target during the conflict, required painstaking restoration. Tracks had been torn apart, stations demolished, and signaling systems disabled. In Germany and Poland, engineers coordinated massive repair operations, often under harsh conditions and with limited resources. Beyond simple restoration, tracks were realigned for efficiency, switches and junctions modernized, and bridges reinforced to carry heavier trains. Urban planners ensured that new stations were accessible from surrounding neighborhoods, linking rail networks seamlessly with roads and public transit. These efforts transformed transportation from a patchwork of broken lines into a coordinated, multi-layered network that could serve both industrial logistics and civilian mobility. Road systems underwent an equally dramatic transformation. Pre-war streets, often narrow and winding, were ill-suited to accommodate modern vehicles or emergency services. Urban planners in cities such as Milan and London redesigned arterial roads, introduced one-way streets to reduce congestion, and implemented bypasses to prevent bottlenecks from paralyzing entire districts. Lessons learned from wartime destruction informed these designs. Redundancy became key. Alternate routes, overpasses, and ring roads were incorporated into city layouts to ensure that the failure of a single bridge or roadway would not isolate entire neighborhoods. Roads were no longer mere conduits, they became instruments of efficiency, safety, and resilience. Public transit was another critical element of recovery. Trams, buses, and subway lines, heavily damaged during the war, were repaired and expanded. In Paris, routes were rerouted to serve newly constructed residential areas, while in Berlin, subway tunnels were reinforced and ventilation systems modernized. Integrating multiple modes of transport, road, rail, and tram, allowed citizens to traverse cities efficiently, reconnecting neighborhoods and reviving commerce. Public transport was not just about mobility, it became a symbol of recovery, restoring freedom of movement to populations long constrained by conflict. Ports and airports, essential for international trade and the revival of economies, were rebuilt with equal urgency. Hamburg's port, a critical hub, underwent extensive reconstruction with reinforced docks, expanded cargo handling areas, and mechanized cranes, ensuring that the flow of goods could resume quickly. Airports, increasingly important in the post-war era, were reconstructed with longer runways, modern terminals, and integrated road access. These hubs did more than facilitate transport, they became engines of economic revival, linking domestic production with global trade and enabling cities to reclaim their economic vitality. The reconstruction of mobility demanded remarkable coordination. Engineers, planners, and governments collaborated to prioritize projects, allocate scarce materials, and sequence repairs. Every bridge, street, and railway became a site of careful calculation, balancing immediate necessity with long-term planning. Decisions reflected lessons learned under fire, structures were reinforced to withstand attacks or disasters, routes were diversified to prevent complete disruption, and transportation nodes were integrated with housing, industry, and commerce. This comprehensive approach ensured that rebuilt systems were not only functional but resilient. Mobility also had a profound social and psychological impact. Restored streets, functional public transit, and accessible services signaled a return to normalcy. Families reunited, children could attend schools without obstruction, and markets once again became centers of community life. Pedestrian zones and parks alongside roads enhanced urban livability, showing that transport networks were not merely about moving goods or vehicles, they were about connecting people, communities, and opportunities. Cities that rebuilt their arteries effectively became more than habitable, they became vibrant centers of human activity, social cohesion, and cultural revival. Despite these efforts, challenges persisted. Materials were scarce, labor shortages were acute, and ongoing damage from leftover mines, bombs, or natural disasters complicated projects. Yet, determination never wavered. Citizens, engineers, and planners shared a vision of cities that could thrive despite past destruction. Every bridge rebuilt, every railway restored, and every street widened represented a step toward reclaiming life from devastation. By the end of the first post-war decade, the evidence of recovery was clear: cities were connected once again, commerce flowed, and public life resumed with a vigor unmatched in the immediate aftermath of conflict. The reconstruction of transport networks after World War II illustrates that mobility is not merely technical, it is the lifeblood of urban existence. Roads, rails, ports, and public transit became the veins through which people, goods, and ideas moved, enabling cities to recover economically, socially, and culturally. In the years following Reconstruction, these networks supported industrial growth, facilitated trade, and allowed urban populations to expand into previously inaccessible areas. They demonstrated that human ingenuity, when combined with careful planning and resilience, could transform devastation into opportunity, chaos into coordination, and isolation into connectivity. In every rebuilt bridge, every widened street, and every reopened railway station, there was a story of collaboration, foresight, and determination. The post-war recovery of urban mobility proved that infrastructure is not simply concrete and steel, it is a reflection of societal values, priorities, and hopes. Cities that mastered the art of rebuilding movement, integrating efficiency, safety, and social utility emerged stronger, more resilient, and better equipped to face the challenges of the modern world. In this, the reconstruction of transport was not just about restoring what had been lost, it was about laying the foundation for the future, ensuring that cities could thrive for generations to come. Reimagining the urban landscape, innovation and resilience. As the smoke of war cleared, the ruins of cities revealed more than destruction, they revealed opportunity. Architects, engineers, and planners confronted a blank canvas where tradition collided with necessity. Every shattered street, every flattened block, and every collapsed bridge became a lesson in survival, efficiency, and foresight. Cities could no longer be reconstructed merely as they had been, they had to be reimagined to meet the needs of populations traumatized by conflict, yet resilient enough to withstand future catastrophes. Innovation became both a tool and a philosophy, shaping every aspect of post-war urban life. Prefabrication emerged as a revolutionary solution to the urgent housing crisis. Entire blocks of residential units, industrial buildings, and public facilities were manufactured in controlled environments and then transported to devastated sites. Concrete panels, steel frameworks, and modular rooms allowed construction to progress at unprecedented speed. In Sweden and Germany, neighborhoods that would have taken years to rebuild could now arise in months, providing immediate shelter to displaced families. Prefabrication was more than efficiency, it was precision. Standardized components ensured structural integrity, while modular designs allowed flexibility, adapting to uneven terrain or varying plot sizes. In cities such as Rotterdam and Milan, entire districts were constructed using these methods, blending modernist aesthetics with practical functionality. Utilities, long neglected until crises revealed their fragility, became a central focus of reconstruction. Water systems were reinforced with modern pumps and pipelines, ensuring consistent pressure and minimizing contamination risks. Electrical grids were redesigned for reliability, incorporating redundant pathways to prevent outages and improve safety. Sewage networks were upgraded, preventing disease outbreaks and supporting dense urban populations. Engineers treated utilities as an integrated ecosystem. Water, electricity, gas, and communications were coordinated in city layouts, ensuring that growth would not outpace infrastructure. In Tokyo and London, this integration was pivotal, demonstrating that a city's survival depended as much on the invisible networks beneath the streets as on the buildings above. Urban design embraced resilience at every scale. Traditional layouts, often a tangled web of narrow lanes and uneven plots, were replaced with wide boulevards, open public spaces, and strategically planned industrial zones. Zoning laws separated residential districts from commercial and manufacturing areas, reducing the risk of accidents and improving quality of life. Parks, plazas, and playgrounds were embedded throughout neighborhoods, offering both leisure and evacuation routes in emergencies. Planners recognized that resilience was not solely structural, it was social and spatial. Communities needed space to thrive, to recover, and to connect. Rotterdam's post-war reconstruction exemplified this approach, blending modern infrastructure with human-centered design to create neighborhoods that were functional, safe, and psychologically supportive. Disaster preparedness shaped architectural choices. Buildings incorporated reinforced concrete, flexible frameworks, and fire-resistant materials. Roads and bridges were designed with multiple load paths to prevent isolation during emergencies, and evacuation routes were integrated into city grids. Underground shelters, bomb-proof bunkers, and strategically located safe zones became part of standard urban planning. Hiroshima's reconstruction, integrating memorials with resilient housing, demonstrated the synthesis of memory and preparation. Every structural decision reflected the imperative to transform vulnerability into protection, ensuring that the mistakes of war would not dictate the future. Innovation extended to economic planning as well. Industrial zones were strategically situated near transport hubs, ports, and rail lines to maximize efficiency. Warehouses, factories, and commercial centers were rebuilt with modern materials and construction methods, enabling rapid production and distribution. Rotterdam's rebuilt port, equipped with advanced cranes and logistics infrastructure, became a model of economic revitalization. Cities recovered not merely as places to live, but as engines of commerce, production, and opportunity. Reconstruction was inseparable from economic strategy, physical design and productivity were mutually reinforcing. Technology played a decisive role in shaping post-war urban landscapes. Surveying techniques, aerial photography, and early computer-assisted mapping informed the placement of roads, utilities, and buildings. Advances in construction machinery and prefabricated assembly allowed projects to progress rapidly without sacrificing quality. Reconstruction sites became laboratories for experimentation, where lessons from wartime scarcity and urgency were translated into methods that would serve cities for decades. Cities were being rebuilt not only to survive but to flourish in the context of modernity and rapid technological advancement. Social considerations were equally central. Housing projects integrated schools, clinics, marketplaces, and communal spaces, ensuring that neighborhoods were more than collections of buildings. Parks, squares, and pedestrian zones encouraged social interaction, promoting psychological recovery and community cohesion. Planners understood that the essence of a city was human, not just structural. Resilience depended on both physical robustness and social vitality. Cities became living organisms, designed to nurture people as much as to accommodate them. By the end of the first decade of Reconstruction, the results were transformative. Entire neighborhoods rose from rubble, public utilities functioned reliably, and transportation networks facilitated mobility and commerce. Factories and commercial centers resumed operations, supporting livelihoods and economic recovery. Parks and public spaces fostered community life, while cultural landmarks reminded citizens of history and identity. Prefabricated buildings, integrated utilities, and carefully planned streets had created urban environments that were not only habitable but exemplary of modern, resilient design. The legacy of this era extended beyond bricks and concrete. Cities emerged stronger, more adaptable, and capable of supporting larger, more diverse populations. Lessons learned from destruction about materials, planning, and social needs were codified into urban regulations, building codes, and planning methodologies. The post-war Reconstruction era demonstrated that innovation and foresight could transform devastation into opportunity, ensuring that cities would be safer, more functional, and more human-centered than before. Rebuilding after the war was not merely an act of restoration, it was an act of imagination and courage. Every prefabricated block, every reinforced utility, every widened street symbolized the possibility of turning catastrophe into progress. Citizens, planners, and engineers worked together to create urban landscapes that were resilient, efficient, and livable. The scars of war remained visible, but they were interwoven with signs of human ingenuity and hope. Cities were reborn, not simply as survivors of conflict, but as beacons of what careful planning, innovative thinking, and collective effort could achieve. In these reconstructed urban landscapes, the human spirit found its reflection. Life returned to streets, neighborhoods thrived, commerce resumed, and communities rebuilt their identity. The cities of the post-war world demonstrated that destruction, no matter how total, could be met with ingenuity, foresight, and resilience. Reconstruction was not just about rebuilding structures, it was about rebuilding life itself, creating environments that could sustain, protect, and inspire generations to come. Through innovation, planning, and a commitment to human-centered design, the cities that rose from the ashes became living proof that humanity could reclaim not only its homes but its future. From ashes to life, economic revival and cultural rebirth. The first post-war years were marked not by silence but by a low hum of determined activity. While the rubble of cities still smoldered in places, citizens, engineers, and governments were already planning not just to rebuild, but to rejuvenate life itself. The destruction had been total in many urban areas, factories had vanished, markets were empty, and millions of families were homeless. Yet within this void lay the opportunity to reimagine economies, restore culture, and revive communities with a vision for resilience, prosperity, and continuity. Recovery was no longer only a technical problem, it was a deeply human challenge. Economic revival became the cornerstone of post-war reconstruction. Industrial zones that had once powered wartime machinery were repurposed to supply civilian needs. In Turin and Birmingham, factories previously dedicated to tanks and aircraft were converted into textile, automobile, and consumer goods production. Governments offered incentives for businesses to reopen, and labor forces, often composed of returning soldiers and displaced civilians, were retrained to meet peacetime demands. Reconstruction projects themselves became major employers, building roads, bridges, and housing not only restored infrastructure but provided livelihoods, ensuring that the human cost of war could be mitigated through productive engagement. Ports and transport hubs were prioritized for economic revival. Rotterdam's reborn docks facilitated imports and exports, while Hamburg and Antwerp became gateways for trade that revitalized regional economies. Rebuilt rail networks allowed goods to flow efficiently across borders, reconnecting cities to markets and reintegrating regions that had been isolated by conflict. Reconstruction was simultaneously logistical and strategic. Each restored connection was a lifeline, ensuring that commerce, production, and community survival advanced hand in hand. Housing reconstruction played a dual role, providing shelter while stimulating economic activity. Prefabricated homes and standardized apartment blocks were constructed rapidly, yet planners integrated them into coherent neighborhoods with schools, markets, and clinics. Social infrastructure, parks, plazas, and recreational areas was incorporated to foster a sense of community, essential for psychological recovery after years of trauma. Urban recovery, planners realized, was as much about restoring human networks as it was about rebuilding concrete structures. Communities needed spaces to gather, children needed playgrounds, and neighborhoods needed cohesion, not just walls. Cultural restoration emerged as a profound component of recovery. Cities like Warsaw meticulously reconstructed historic landmarks, churches, and public squares, preserving centuries of architectural heritage as symbols of resilience. In Dresden, portions of the Baroque city center were restored, blending memory with modern design, creating urban landscapes where history and progress coexisted. Hiroshima integrated memorials and peace parks alongside new housing and civic buildings, ensuring that cultural memory was honored while supporting daily life. Cultural reconstruction served as both a reminder of loss and a framework for hope, reaffirming identity and continuity amid the broader reconstruction effort. Education and civic engagement became integral to the recovery process. Schools, universities, and vocational centers were rebuilt and modernized, training citizens to contribute to economic, technological, and social revival. Communities were encouraged to participate in planning decisions, ensuring that reconstruction reflected collective needs rather than top-down impositions. Civic participation fostered ownership, transforming citizens from passive victims of war into active architects of their own futures. Public dialogue and collaborative projects became mechanisms through which societies could heal, learn from mistakes, and establish resilience for future generations. Innovation continued to shape recovery at every level. New construction materials, prefabrication methods, and urban layouts allowed cities to be rebuilt faster and more efficiently. Utilities, water, electricity, and sanitation were upgraded, transport systems modernized, and disaster preparedness integrated into city plans. The lessons of wartime destruction informed regulations, building codes, and emergency protocols, ensuring that the cities of the future would be safer and more adaptive. Reconstruction was thus simultaneously retrospective and forward-looking. It honored the past while equipping society for the uncertainties of the future. Psychological recovery was inseparable from material reconstruction. Public spaces, cultural centers, and community projects offered opportunities for interaction, healing, and expression. Markets resumed their social role as centers of trade and conversation, schools became hubs of learning and creativity, and theaters, museums, and concert halls once again hosted performances that reminded citizens of human achievement beyond survival. Recovery was holistic. It encompassed livelihoods, cultural identity, social bonds, and civic pride. Cities were rebuilt not just for living, but for flourishing. By the end of the first post-war decade, tangible evidence of recovery was unmistakable. Streets teemed with commerce, factories resumed production, and transport networks allowed seamless movement of people and goods. Neighborhoods were vibrant, integrating residential, commercial, and recreational functions. Cultural landmarks stood restored, and communities regained a sense of identity and purpose. The integration of economic revival, social cohesion, and cultural restoration ensured that reconstruction was not merely reactive, but transformative. Cities emerged not as replicas of their past, but as evolved, resilient, and adaptive spaces capable of sustaining life for generations. The legacy of post-war reconstruction extends far beyond buildings and infrastructure. Economically, cities became hubs of renewed productivity and trade. Socially, citizens regained trust in communities and institutions. Culturally, historical memory was preserved while embracing modernity. Reconstruction demonstrated that true recovery is multidimensional. Physical rebuilding, economic revitalization, social cohesion, and cultural preservation are inseparable elements of a city's revival. Ultimately, the story of post-war reconstruction is a story of human resilience and ingenuity. From the ashes of devastation arose cities that were not only functional, but vibrant and forward-looking. Every reconstructed street, every reopened factory, every cultural landmark symbolized determination, hope, and creativity. Cities became proof that even in the face of unprecedented destruction, humanity possesses the capacity to rebuild, to innovate, and to reclaim not only spaces but life itself. Reconstruction was more than bricks and mortar. It was a reclamation of identity, community, and future potential. As the sun rose over newly rebuilt skylines, it illuminated a profound truth: devastation had not destroyed the human spirit. Instead, it had revealed its strength. Cities, economies, and societies had risen from ruins, stronger, more resilient, and better prepared for the challenges of the modern world. The post-war era became a testament to collaboration, foresight, and courage, showing that life, even after total destruction, could be rebuilt with dignity, purpose, and hope. The cities of the post-war world stand as enduring symbols. From ashes to life, from despair to revival, humanity had forged a path forward, proving that recovery is not merely possible, it can be extraordinary.